Imagine a company operating straight out of Pinewood Studios that makes filmmaking lights. Now imagine how extraordinary would an LED panel be if they were to make one. But you can actually stop imagining now, because you're looking straight at it. You're looking at the Rotolight Titan X1, and yes, electronically controlled diffusion is a thing on this light, but before we get down to details, there is one key expectation that I should probably establish about this light. This is likely not going to be a budget option when it comes to LED lights. This is pretty high-end among the LED panels, and Rotolight is a brand that actually operates out of Pinewood Studios UK, meaning this piece of gear was made right by where some of the Bond movies were shot. In fact, Rotolight products have actually been used for the filming of Skyfall. Long story short, these things are built to industry standard. This retails for about $4,000 US for the standard kit, although right now they do have a very attractive launch discount at the moment, but more on that later. For now, let's talk about what's it actually like to be using a light of this caliber, because prior to this, I really was not sure at all what to expect from an LED panel of this range. Well, one area that I can tell you they most definitely did not cheap out on is manufacturing. There is absolutely nothing from this entire kit that feels poorly put together. Certainly no corners being cut in terms of materials either. You can feel how dense everything is when you pick this up. It has quite a bit of heft to it. This was consciously designed to survive a rough day on set. But a very significant amount of this light's value actually lies beneath its surface. Internally, it is equipped with Lumen Radio's Time Mode 2 module, meaning out of the box, it is compatible with wireless DMX, and it can also be controlled directly over Bluetooth using the Luminaire 3 application. Most of the other lights in this range would only get such functionality by attaching additional modules, which would of course add to the cost of the system. Take the RE Sky panels, for example. The wireless solution offered by RE involves getting a dongle for each light that communicates with their base station that costs this much at the moment. But the X1 still has one more built-in radio actually, and that's Elinchrome's Skyport receiver. Because the Titan X1 has a flash mode, if you have an Elinchrome Skyport flash transmitter, you can use that to trigger the X1 wirelessly without any additional accessories. But everything this can do wirelessly, it can also do the good old wired way. If you want to trigger it as a flash with any other flash receiver, there is a flash sync port at the bottom. It's also got 5-pin XLR and also RJ45 connections for wired DMX. Now before we go too far ahead in terms of features, let me properly introduce this panel. The Titan X1 is an RGB WW light, meaning it's got red, green, blue, warm white, and cool white diodes, so it can output virtually any color you could possibly want. The area of the X1 that outputs light measures roughly 34 by 30 centimeters, which translates into essentially a 1x1 foot panel, and for a 1x1, this is impressively bright. It was strong enough to be used as a fill under afternoon sun, and what kind of bothers me is how it's achieving that brightness with not a lot of diodes actually. Look how loosely packed the individual diodes are. Plus the fact that this is RGBWW, meaning you are sacrificing maximum output for color versatility because all your diodes are almost never fully on at any given time. So while the Titan X1 might not be the single brightest light I've ever used, I am more than happy with the output. It is also an incredibly easy light to use. The Titan X1 wins hands down the best light I've ever used in terms of operability. You have the option of capacitive navigation buttons, 3 control dials, and a huge color touchscreen. Now when it comes to lights, I wouldn't usually talk about this, but the user interface is just splendid on this light. Touch controls are incredibly intuitive. My favorite way of changing settings on this light is simply tapping on a parameter, then using one of the dials to, well, dial it in. Super smooth scrolling animations in the menus, and there's even a fade transition as you move between pages. Was it necessary for Rotolight to do all this, like pay this much attention to the user interface? I certainly don't think so, not for a light at least, but I'm really happy they did. It makes the product feel incredibly finessed every time you interact with it. You'll also see a line of numbers on the top row of your UI. Those are your mode-specific user presets. There are 50 slots in total, 10 for each mode, so you can recall your presets incredibly quickly from the touchscreen. I've never seen a user interface quite like this on any other fixture before. It does make everything else feel a little ancient in comparison if you let yourself get used to this. But the controls being built into the back of the light itself, every once in a while you'll find it to be out of reach because it's way too high up or too down low. You've got 5 main ways for dialing in a color on this light. There's the familiar CCT mode for outputting white light. You get a temperature range from 3000 to 10,000 Kelvin, and that comes with full green magenta tint adjustment, and it goes all the way to full plus and minus green. There's also an RGBW mode, which gives you individual control over the balance of each of the R, G, and B diodes, plus a group that operates both the white diodes together. And then there's the more familiar modes like HSI and XY modes, but I do find it really neat that in XY mode, you have the option of limiting the light to output within the Rec 2020 or Rec 709 color gamut, so you don't output any colors beyond what the camera can capture. Just thought that was a very nice touch in terms of software. And then there's filter mode, which emulates the look of lighting filters. There's a massive collection of over 1,400 filters in the light from 4 major filter manufacturers. You'll be finding filters from Lee, Roscoe, Apollo, and Gamcolor. They're grouped by color in the menu, which makes the most sense in my opinion. Also, for each of the filters, you can press down on the center dial to toggle between having the filter applied to a 3200 Kelvin source or a 6500 Kelvin daylight source, turning this into a light that you'll essentially never ever have to throw a filter on, to the extent that it even has its own diffusion. Now, Rotolight calls the technology SmartSoft, and even though I wouldn't recommend staring straight into a light, it really is quite fascinating to see SmartSoft diffusion in action. It's a bit magical actually. You can set it from 0 to 100%, and never have I ever thought I would be able to dial in the amount of diffusion on a light digitally. I'm personally a huge fan of soft lighting, and built-in diffusion like this, it's great for taking the edge off of shadows, and for a panel this size, you can crank up the diffusion to maximum, put your subject near the source, and you'll be able to get soft lighting without any additional modifiers. But if having diffusion is so great, then what's the point of diffusion being adjustable then? Isn't it better if I just leave it on all the time? Well, it's always better to have the option of removing the diffusion or at least dialing it down, because like all diffusion, it will knock off a bit of your output intensity. When I metered my unit at 5500 Kelvin at maximum output, no diffusion was roughly about a stop brighter than full diffusion. So if you ever want to use this light with any other modifiers or as a bound source, you have the option of dialing back that internal diffusion to gain some extra output, especially in cases when the internal diffusion is not likely to make a visible difference in the final light quality. The SmartSoft diffusion also affects the beam spread of the light quite significantly. As you increase diffusion, the spread would widen outwards. It also throws the light out a bit more evenly. As opposed to no diffusion, it's a bit more focused, hotter in the center, and falls off towards the sides. It is without question one of the coolest features on this light having SmartSoft, but it's also not uncommon to find effects built into lights like this. But again, Rotolight is taking it way more seriously than I ever imagined any company would with built-in effects. You see, for their effects, Rotolight has developed it in collaboration with Stefan Langer, who's a cinematographer and also a VFX veteran who's worked on many Bond movies as well. So on top of being really good looking, there are some really nicely thought out ones as well. For example, this custom fade in and out effect. You set a duration for the fade and then you trigger it to happen. Sounds very simple, but the amount of times I wished a light had this sort of feature. Anyway, here's a couple of my favorite effects. Now earlier on in the video, I also mentioned the ability to use this light as a flash. Now to some that might sound like a ridiculous idea because this is clearly a light that can stay on continuously. Why would you ever want to flash it? Well, if you're shooting on location and running on battery, flashing it saves a ton of power, but more importantly, as long as you flash it in CCT mode, you gain one extra stop of output. That's twice the maximum brightness as leaving it on continuously, so I think that's enough reason. And bear in mind, this is an RGB flash with variable diffusion, no recycle time at all. That's what I'm talking about.
Ooh, my eyes.
And it even supports high-speed sync if you use it with a Skyport transmitter. In terms of options for powering the X1, you can of course power it over AC using the included power supply unit, which you can actually have the option of mounting on the light stand or on the actual back of the light itself, but you can also power it using two V-mount batteries using an additional battery adapter accessory. Now that would replace the power supply unit, and it's wonderful that the output of the light is not limited in any way when you are on battery power. There's two fans on the back that draw air through the light, and while they can be audible if you set them to their maximum, which I'm gonna do here, and that is maximum, the microphone is right above my head somewhere here, but if I leave it in auto mode, I've actually never had any issues with fan noise, which is right now, it's in auto. There is also a stealth mode that suppresses the fans if you need the light to be particularly quiet. The thermals, however, have been excellent on this light. I've left the light on for hours on end and neither the power supply or the fixture ever felt hot. The most it got was slightly warm on the power supply. So is there anything I don't like about this light? Now, if I were to be petty, I would complain about the light requiring a moment to boot. Every time you power it on, it does take a few seconds before you can do anything to it. But actually, considering how elaborate the firmware is, I suppose I could give it a few seconds. And having used the Titan X1 for a little over a month now, I'm pretty sure to say that Rotolight held nothing back when they were designing this light. There's really not much more that a user could wish that the light can do, because they've already pretty much thrown everything in. And because they did just launch this light not long ago, Rotolight is offering the Titan X1 at a huge $1,000 discount on their website and with their retailers. I was informed that this is a very special launch pricing and it will only last until 31st January 2021. And if you happen to be picking up an X1 from Rotolight's own online store, they are offering viewers of this channel a very special coupon code that I will put up here that includes for free this battery adapter worth $349. This is the one you need to power the X1 using V-mount batteries. So that's a total discount value of $1,349 if you pick up a Titan X1 during the promotional period. I'll leave links below for anyone interested, and before you go, why not try watching some of my other videos? Bang, 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 bang. I'm having too much fun.